And
And for the sake of introductions, if that matters for this too, my name is Desmond Watt, and I was a high school bio teacher at Yes from
this is maybe
2008
just my
to
reflection. Maybe it
2009.
was wrong, but I remember like you kind of
But yeah,
coming to
so
me for some help or support, and like you're asking like how what you can do to get kids more engaged, and I was like, your lesson looks really good to me. Like I don't know, and I went in your class and realized that like they just extend a lot of the students extended me more credit. This is my
I know
opinion.
that
Like
I
it
was
just seemed
coming
like
in
people.
after Liz Terry, I remember, and that everybody's like, she was amazing.
What we do with teachers a lot of times is it would be the equivalent of like taking a doctor and throwing them in the emergency room and not giving them any support, and look, a couple people died because you didn't know what you were doing, and
Of
okay,
life.
let's move on. How would you
After the
compare
last
education?
2 years of my life attempting to learn how to be a teacher, like all I have to do is just show up and study
And
all
I
the
was
time.
curious
Like,
if you feel like,
sign me up.
do
And
you do
it
you
was
see
grueling and it was,
stereotypes imposed on people in your in healthcare? Yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, conscious, unconscious bias is constant. I mean, to speak about the PA profession is less diverse than the physician profession.
What
So just
is there any more interesting stuff you have to talk about or
it
questions?
was the one of the most informative years of my life that I could possibly think of. And the way that it challenged me and the way that it set me up for how I think about life now in a way that my time at Skyline, I think, frankly, couldn't have. And I hack it up anyway,
Yeah,
right?
right. Whatever happens, happens. I hit the record button. I appreciate you for doing this. I've been just recording conversations with teachers and students from Yes and from other backgrounds in education. Um, and I think I don't know who's going to watch. I try to tell the audience what they should know. What I'd say is you and I were friends. We taught together for 1 year. We're Facebook friends ever since then. But what was interesting about our experiences was we were both. I think we both started teaching the same year, but I started at Yes, and your second year was at Yes. So I remember we were both in our second years together. You taught what, biology?
Biology, yep.
And where did you teach before Yes?
So I taught at Skyline High School the year prior.
And
And for the sake of introductions, if that matters for this too, my name is Desmond Watt, and I was a high school bio teacher at Yes from 2008 to 2009. But yeah, so I was at Skyline the first year, and I started doing Teach for America for a couple of reasons. One was I had been on like a laser focused path towards med school for all 4 years of college. And I realized by the time I was supposed to start applying to med school that the last thing I wanted to do was go to med school. And so I was like, let's try teaching instead. And then this whole TFA thing came around. Um, and it just seemed like a really incredible opportunity to do something different, learn a lot, grow a lot, and not try to continue to go to med school at the time, which I just didn't want to do 4 more years of school. I don't know what my concept of what I was getting myself into was exactly, but I think for me, I grew up in a community. I bounced around like a ton when I was a kid. I was like rural communities, like our family was pretty poor growing up. But despite all of that, like I grew up in a pretty lily white suburb for my high school education, and it was really not diverse at all. And I had kind of like the like frat guy experience at college and whatnot, which I realized like this is not my thing. Um, and I was just like, I need to do something else. I need to do something different. And the idea of just like jumping in with 2 feet into like Oakland, California, grew up my entire life in Illinois, get out of Illinois and do something different coming out of college just was really, really enticing to me. And I'm saying all this because TFA does like a matching process with their, teachers and with schools. And I got matched with Skyline High School, which is like one of like the kind of quote unquote best public high schools in Oakland at the time, probably still is. And I had
Yeah,
five.
that's changed. The reputation of Skyline as one of the best big high schools in Oakland definitely has changed since you were there.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, but go keep
Well,
going.
Tom Hanks went there. So, I mean, that was the reputation. But no, I had five classes and two honor sections, which was like kind of bizarre. And like, I had this sense of like, I'm not doing anybody any good here. You know what I mean? Like, you could put a cup of coffee in front of these kids and they would excel. And so when it came to the second year and the whole, what prep are you going to have? They actually wanted me to also start teaching chemistry and biology, which was part of my decision to leave Skyline, but not the main thrust of that decision. The main thrust of that decision is like, I didn't come out to California to teach honors biology. Like my understanding was like, I should be teaching kids that are like underserved, and I wanted to commit to that piece of why I was out there.
That's
And
interesting.
so
So
my perception, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I'm like, that is definitely not the typical TFA story you hear. Did you have like, what I heard about Skyline back then was that it was almost like there were two different campuses or something. Like the honors program was kind of separated from um the other programs. But like, did you have two honors class sections and three that um were they all kind of felt like they didn't need you to motivate them, inspire them, or to
No, there were definitely some challenges with a couple of my classes, but I also just perceived like I'm kind of just going to get more of this in the second year, and like I really don't think that's why I signed up for this.
you
And
so you
so
chose to switch.
yes, yeah, my switching over to Yes was an active decision that felt like, okay, this is more aligned with like why I said I wanted to do this and what I thought I was signing up for. And for better or for worse, I mean, I don't think I was a particularly good teacher. Like, who's all that good at teaching after a year of doing it without actually training to do it as an undergrad? Like my teacher training was 6 weeks of summer school in Compton, Los Angeles, and like, working 100 hours a week for 6 weeks and like learning how to lesson plan and all this stuff was really trial by fire. So I was really just a very mediocre teacher, certainly my first year. And yeah, so Yes was really like, this is what I thought I was supposed to be here for and what I really thought I was committing to. So I wanted to do that more intently. And then it goes from there.
Yeah, so that year Yes was a very pivotal one. I think I talked to Maureen because that was her last year. And I just remember like we had like I remember the trip we did to Santa Cruz. You remember that, like,
Mm-hmm.
we had a day in
That
Santa
house.
Cruz? Yeah, that house. I remember that. That year we were having discussions about making a decision to close down the school, which we ultimately didn't decide to. But we were second year teachers there together. What I remember was that um, I think I guess this is maybe just my reflection, maybe it was wrong, but I remember like you kind of coming to me for some help or support, and like you're asking like what you can do to get kids more engaged, and I was like, your lesson looks really good to me, like I don't know. And I went in your class and realized that like they just a lot of the students extended me more credit. This is my opinion, like it just seemed like because it was my second year there, like there was a little bit of this like they knew I was there for them and they were willing to give me more credit. And I could see that the kids had some respect for you, but they still like, and this is a thing, like kids definitely see what kind of wiggle room they can get when you're in your first year at a new school. But what was your experience at Yes like?
So I know that I was coming in after Liz Terry, I remember, and that everybody's like, she was amazing, you know, and I felt like I had like these really big shoes I had to fill. And, you know, somebody had been teaching for like 15, 20 years or something like that. And it's like, okay, second year biology teacher. I knew biology. Like I studied biology quite extensively in undergrad. I did bench research and all this other stuff. So I was really, really excited about figuring out how to really, really teach about the concept of a lab in particular. Like I really wanted to use lab-based activities to develop thinking skills and help kids look at data and draw conclusions, and conclusions that weren't like terribly obvious, like the things you had to sort of extend your thinking and whatnot. I think there was a little bit of an immediate shock around the resources that were truly available, which I assumed weren't going to be really extensive. But then at the same time, I'm like, okay, how do I start planning around like getting some resources and maybe getting some funding, and like just really not having the wherewithal coming into it to deploy those, and just
So there was
feeling
a difference between the resources from Skyline to Yes.
very much so, and more like the teachers at Skyline like knew the drill, kind of like they knew what to expect as well. Like I remember one of the teachers was like, always have a list ready, because there is going to come a time during the school year and you'll never know when it is, and they'll say, we have X number of dollars to spend on whatever supplies, get us your list by the end of day tomorrow. And it was, so you just had to have like your wish list like ready to go. And this was somebody who'd been with the school for, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, and like very much feeling like supported by people who were like sort of expert teachers in many ways and could help kind of lead the way, and feeling like a little bit more of an island as a science teacher at Yes. Like it felt like less of a department, so to speak, and having to kind of navigate your own way through that a little bit more. Just reflecting on it, I feel like that was one of those kind of differences that really stood out.
There's probably only one other science teacher too, right? Was it Pam Barrett, or maybe was that?
I think so. That I honestly, I have a hard time even remembering. I mean, I knew that I had Bremner was in my hallway, and then Karen Pizzetti was like, he was across the hall from me, and then I think Karen was like the next door down. But yeah, I think that's right. I didn't feel like it was like a department where there's a lot of like opportunity to collaborate and share resources and kind of bounce ideas off of each other. That really didn't feel like there was quite that much of a presence.
For sure. I never worked with another teacher who taught the same class as me until I was in like my 9th year teaching math, now that I'm at a big suburban school. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So what else, like, did you feel successful in teaching the labs or teaching the extension of the type of thinking that you were talking about? Like, or what was your reflection on that year?
As a whole, I would say no. I think towards the end of it, so I think one thing I learned towards the end, it took me a really long time to get to this point, is like, you can't be up in front of the class teaching for more than like 10, 15 minutes. Like, you need to get really, really tight on the amount of time that you are attempting to hold the attention of the class as like a cohort before they are actually working on things. And then you can kind of like circulate around the class. And like, I had such a hard time, I think, getting to that place where you can communicate directions or information in a way that's really succinct, and then spend the rest of the time actually working with kids on a small group basis or more one-on-one basis. The last unit that I taught, I felt like I got so much closer to that, because I had developed basically like it was like 4 weeks or something like that of like a really differentiated sort of approach, where we set the whole time up at the beginning and told kids like, this is what class is going to feel like the next 4 weeks. And we're going to spend very, very little time with me talking at you, and every day is going to look like this, and you're going to be allowed to work at the pace that is appropriate for you. And it really allowed me to, like, the kids that wanted to keep on chugging ahead, we're going to be able to chug ahead, and we had kind of like the next thing ready to go for them. And then the kids that need a little bit more support, there was the opportunity to provide a little bit more support. To be perfectly honest, by that point in the year, I was like, there are some kids that I'm just like, I'm not going to put a ton of energy and effort into, because it's just not going to be worth it at this point. And that was like a weird decision to make, to not, like, you know, TFA as a concept is like no child left behind kind of thing. That's a terrible phrase to use, but it's like, you know, everybody has the opportunity to excel. And I think at that point I was like, except for these two kids, I'm not going to like spend my time on trying to bring them along when I've got 28 other kids in this class that are like trying to learn to one degree or another, and just sort of like risk mitigating, for lack of a better way to put it. Like, let's not have them like impede the progress of the rest of the class, which I hate to say, but I mean, that's probably where I got. And the small like pride, if there is any, was like, I know that the test scores my students got that year were better than the test scores the students got the previous year, to the extent that that's a measure of success.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a reality. I went through Oakland Teaching Fellows, and I think that there is a reality, and the same thing happens in PD. I think sometimes is we talk about things, and then we're like, we have this image of what it's like teaching in the classroom, and they're not the same. The classroom is not the same as what you picture it as, and you do have to make decisions. There's trade-offs, right? And I think that you can't, for one thing that I had to learn, is you can't let the kids that are not like, there's some kids that will, if you focus all your energy on them because they're not doing what you tell them to or something, then they're going to drain you. You do have to focus on the positive things and the successes. And I don't know if it was like this for you. That year, my first year was definitely one of the hardest years of my life when I think of in terms of professionally. My second year, I'm not sure if I would put it in that same category, because I felt like I was more effective in my classroom. But also with all the other stuff we were going through at the school, it was just a really draining year. Did it feel draining to you with school closure discussions and things?
It was draining, but I didn't have a basis for comparison. So it was draining to me as compared to my experience at Skyline the year prior. But I also kind of think I knew I was setting myself up for that. So I don't know that I had the same perspective as you did as far as like some of the other stuff going on. I honestly don't know that I even paid that much attention to it, because in part is TFA is designed to be a 2-year program. And I think in my head, I had assumed I was only going to do 2 years. I didn't really have much of an intent to carry on to a third year or like continue teaching. Like, I think I knew almost no matter what those 2 years were going to look like, I was probably going to turn back towards some sort of healthcare related journey.
And was this at the beginning, or was this a decision you made during the 2-year process, or it kind of never changed?
I guess I would say I was open to the idea that I would teach for more than 2 years. I just don't think I ever thought all that seriously about it.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly.
Okay. So you knew basically your whole year at Yes, you're kind of aware that this is going to be your only year there.
Yeah, and I don't want to say like that created any sort of senioritis or anything like that. Honestly, if anything, it was more like, okay, like this is my year to like attempt to be a somewhat effective teacher, and this is like the whole reason I even decided to do this. So like, get your shit together and try to do that. And I think as much, if any, of my frustration came from my grappling with that than it did with what was going on with the bigger conversations happening, I guess. I remember that actually impacting students a lot more than anything else. Like, they knew those conversations were going on very clearly. Yeah, and I feel like I had some that were, that was very hard for them.
That's the thing I don't remember, because is how much, I know that everything that impacts the teachers finds its way to impact the students, but I didn't know if it was directly, because I remember the conversations happening during our PD, where it was like, we literally had to, each one of us had to vote whether we thought the school should close or not. And I remember you putting, like you put in a ton of effort, and you were committed, and like in that like you built the community with the students and the staff, which I think is impressive. I feel like if I knew that if I was feeling senioritis, I'm not sure I would have committed to it. Do you remember the conversation? Like, I feel like a big part of our professional development was this whole like courageous conversations on race. Do you remember those things?
Yeah, I definitely remember those. I remember being told at one point by Maureen, and I think Maureen would own this, and I should own this too, during actually a conversation in her office, like a review period or something like that. There was like an assessment timeline, and she said something to the effect of like, I'm concerned that you don't believe that each of your students can succeed. Like, I remember it was something to that effect. Like, she could tell in observing my teaching styles in the classroom that I held the belief that not all my students could be successful. And that's not quite one of those courageous conversations, but it's also just sort of like calling somebody out in a way that forces them to think about things pretty deeply and kind of face themselves a little bit. And I remember feeling very exposed related to that type of stuff, but also trying very hard to engage with it also.
Yeah, I know. I felt the same way, that I didn't know where I like those conversations. I just feel like, looking back, I'm glad that I was in those conversations at the time. Like, I didn't know, like it was a lot of like new stuff to me. So did you go on to med school after you finished?
So I moved back to Chicago, and I ended up doing like some bench research at Northwestern for a year, and ended up going to PA school the following year.
What is
So I was in
bench
PA
research?
school. Just like, I literally worked in a fruit fly genetics lab at Northwestern for a year, like hilariously stereotypical
Okay.
fruit fly stuff.
Okay, like studying genetic mutations or something.
Exactly, in fruit flies. Yep.
And then what's PA school? That's I always thought you had gone to med school. Is PA school similar?
For physician assistants, it's PA school. For physicians, it's med school. So it's like 27-month program, graduate program. But I did that 2010 to 2012.
Okay.
And then have been practicing in primary care ever since then.
And it's interesting. Yeah, well, because I talked to Maureen, and one of the metaphors she would use, that she still uses, is about this, like comparing the education industry to teaching, or to medicine. And she would say, like, what we do with teachers a lot of times is it would be the equivalent of like taking a doctor and throwing them in the emergency room and not giving them any support, and look, a couple people died because you didn't know what you were doing, and okay, let's move on. How would you compare education to medicine, like in terms of preparing people for the experience they're going to have?
As far as the preparation for the experience in education versus the preparation for the experience in medicine, my version of that is not one that is by any means traditional. Because again, I mean, my preparation for teaching was 6 weeks of summer school in the Watts neighborhood in Los Angeles. And others have a lot more time to kind of figure out what their style is and what, how to build a lesson and all this other stuff. So I remember the idea that all I needed to do was show up and sit in class for 40 hours a week as being like the most liberating feeling of like, after the last 2 years of my life attempting to learn how to be a teacher, like all I have to do is just show up and study all the time, like sign me up. And it was grueling, and it was a ton of effort, but it was effort I could control. Like it was entirely up to me to like either do it or not do it. And you don't have nearly that degree of agency in a classroom setting, at least as an early career teacher, or at least I didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also think that I mean, my experience with the teacher training was the same as yours, although it was in Oakland and not in South Central Los Angeles. But there is only I mean, I think that more time and more experience in the classroom would definitely be worthwhile. There's only so many books you can read that are
Right.
to get ready for teaching. I wonder what, like, do you deal directly with patients as a PA? I'm curious how you feel like teaching may have helped your bedside manner or something like that.
Tremendously. I mean, just to have empathy with the human experience, one, being able to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, possibly, whether it be standing up in front of 30 people or just sort of owning and leading a dialogue with somebody who is wants to put their trust in you. I mean, I think that being a teacher was an enormous asset to my taking the content learned in the clinical training and putting it into practice and actually talking to people. And I think that was a huge benefit as it relates to book learning versus time to actually practice in a controlled setting. Like my program was basically 50-50. So the first year was butts in seats, lectures. The second year, 15 months, was all like you're out there seeing patients under sort of a controlled setting. So you're working with experienced physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, like observing your work with patients. So there was a ton of practical application as far as the training was concerned.
And is that in a hospital, or the patients that you're seeing, or
All over the place: primary care, psychiatry, hospital, surgical. I had 10 different rotations over the course of 15 months. I worked in the Cook County Jail. My women's health rotation was in the Cook County Jail. It was a really broad slice of the healthcare system.
and is that typical for someone that goes through that school, is to work in, like, when you say Cook County Jail, I'm thinking then race and class, those are things that come up when you're dealing with that. So the typical PA student goes through those experiences.
Yes and no. Again, I think I was seeking them out, and in part it was probably informed by my experiences teaching in Oakland. Was like, hell yeah, I'll do a rotation for women's health in the jail, like sign me up. So and I also my emergency medicine rotation was on the west side of Chicago, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the geography of Chicago. The west side of Chicago is a dangerous place, and so I think
I don't know it too well. I always hear south side, but
yeah, the west side of Chicago is bad news. It's just up the road from the jail, if you will. So quite literally. And I think I sought those types of experiences out in part, I think, because of my experiences with teaching in Oakland, honestly.
Okay. Part of the reason I asked that is because I just did one of these with Acute, who's in, who was a graduate. I don't think you had her, but she graduated in her final year. But she does a lot of work in health now, specifically Black health. And we were talking about, like, I was asking her to distinguish between what are Black issues versus what are poverty issues. Like, there's like a lot of people associate the culture of poverty with Black culture, which is an unfair association. And what she basically said is a lot of the health factors, like diabetes, for example, like are stem from a lack of access to healthy foods and food deserts and all these kinds of things. But then also, if you're Black and you don't come from that, you're Black and you're wealthy or come from the suburbs, you're still often treated in the hospital like you don't know anything of, like you're not given credit, or you're like, a lot of stereotypes are imposed on you. And I was curious if you feel like do you see stereotypes imposed on people in healthcare? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, conscious, unconscious bias is constant. I mean, to speak about the PA profession is less diverse than the physician profession. So just as our own demographics, we're incredibly white. We're incredibly female. I think our balance is like 70% female as a profession. And I remember my class, uh, my PA class was like 80 something students. We had one black female student. We had one black student actually. And I remember by like week 2, she like blew up in the middle of a lecture and stormed out and she left the program. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, like, oh, that was, and I was just sitting here looking, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, she's literally the only person like herself in this entire cohort. Like, what do you think that experience is like for her showing up to this lecture hall every day? And
Mhm.
just, and not like, okay, great, like I was able to acknowledge that, but at the same time, like the fact that my other classmates couldn't see that and couldn't see the fact that like out of 86 students, she's the only student of her background in this entire cohort. How do you think that feels? And I definitely have seen it, permeate through my practice and just all the various opportunities that, it's deeply rooted throughout the healthcare system. Not a personal experience. Serena Williams, after she gave birth to her child, was misdiagnosed with shoulder pain that she was experiencing after delivery, and the doctors just blew it off. She had a pulmonary embolism in her lung, which is a life-threatening medical condition. And this is one of the most high-profile athletes in the world. Arguably, as a Black female, she didn't have her medical conditions or medical symptoms or concerns actually heard
Yeah, I
legitimately.
remember hearing that. That's something Acute said too, is like there's assumptions made that your Black tolerance for pain is higher, and
Yep. Pain
so
pain
then
is often undertreated, more commonly for Black patients as well. Yep.
I feel like I've had a similar, like I wonder if there's a lot of TFA, but like I feel like this now that I'm working in Pleasanton. I teach in a different community than I started in. Like you can't unlearn or unsee what you saw working in the communities that we worked in, and then it does become a little bit of like, um well, like for me, I want to open people's eyes to this, like that whole thing of like she's the only person that is like her in the whole class, and then a lot of times as soon as that, if there's one Black person or one other person, as soon as they have any kind of a meltdown, then there's people pointing their fingers at them. Like, do you think I wonder, do you talk to many old TFAers like who are often there new? Like, do you think this is like a common theme of people who have done TFA that are now kind of like in tune to more systemic issues because of that experience?
I do think so. I mean, I do think that there are the fair share of people who go into TFA pretty clear that it's a resume builder, but I don't imagine anybody would electively do this for 2 years of their life just to put it on their resume, or like that was like the number one thing to do, or why they would do it. So I know for me, it's personally been very life-changing in that way. And I mean, honestly, the whole mission of TFA, I think, is not suggesting it's like good or bad or anything like that. I think for me, I learned as much from the students as I probably taught them, which is so corny to say, but I think it's true. And the mission of TFA is not to create lifelong teachers. It's to get people into the classroom where they are in theory needed, but also to learn about what's going on and then go out to other areas of the world to help change the factors that are making things the way they are. Like, whether they go into public policy or healthcare or, whatever else, they're not trying to create lifelong teachers.
Yeah, and it's TFA. I would agree that it's not good or bad. It's complex,
Yeah.
and I think um, what's unfortunate is for the communities that they serve is the if the benefit I do think the benefit, I feel like this towards yes, that you're right, it's cheesy to say, but I definitely learned more from my students than I taught them. And now I'm in another community and I feel like systemic racism is this huge term, and a lot of it is just awareness raising. And I feel like if I was one of my students or like a parent of them right now, I'd be like, well, fuck this shit. Like, I don't want these people learn from us and then they move on. But um, I appreciate all the thoughts that you have to share. Like, I can't think of another question. Like, what is there any more interesting stuff you have to talk about or questions you have for me?
Interesting stuff to talk about related to yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, it was the one of the most informative years of my life that I could possibly think of. And the way that it challenged me and the way that it set me up for how I think about life now in a way that my time at Skyline, I think, frankly, couldn't have, has been invaluable. Am I absolutely like executing on that on a daily basis? No, by no means. And that's something that I really have wanted to kind of bring back in more intentionally. So, like, again, the PA profession is really, really poorly diverse and it's pretty deeply rooted. And so at some point or another, that's like one thing I want to do is start to develop like a mentorship program where, you know, none of these kids have ever even heard of what a PA is in the first place. They don't even realize it's an option. They think doctor, nurse, or that's it as far as healthcare is concerned. So to get out into those schools, help them connect with this is a career path in healthcare, and just bring them all the way through up until the point that they actually get into PA school, just to like attempt to diversify the professional. But from a medical perspective, we already know that going to see a provider who looks like you and appears to share your cultural background improves healthcare outcomes. So, I mean, to better address the systemic racism in the healthcare system or wherever, like, I can't be the guy you're seeing. Like, I'm sorry. You know, I also probably shouldn't be the teacher standing up in front of you. So that's my own reflection on all of it, is like, I was so grateful to be a part of it. And for these kids willingly or unwillingly to share themselves with me. But like, you know, the best thing I can do to own it is make sure that it's not just people like me that continue to show up in those settings, or that like that continues to be an opportunity for people like me. Like, I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, but I feel that same thing. Like I can talk to kids in privileged places about, I can help them see their blind spots because of my experience at yes. And I also felt conflict of maybe I'm not the right person to be in front of that class. Here's another question. How much has your profession changed by the technology that we're using right now? Like,
You know, it's interesting you say that, because actually I've been working in telemedicine for like 7 years. So for me personally, almost not at all. Like, I was doing this prior to COVID, and I'll be doing this after COVID, across the healthcare system quite dramatically. And by the same token, some of the early data that's come out over the last year about the really significant expansion in the use of telemedicine and what its impacts are showing that it might actually be worsening healthcare disparities rather than reducing them, both based on patients' cultural backgrounds, but also based on where they live. So like rural versus urban or suburban. Rural patients tend to have worse access, but then again, patients of color in particular, worsening those healthcare disparities potentially as well, which seems to run counter to what we would think, like, oh, like everybody's got a smartphone, like, you know, they can access this. At least so far, it looks like it might actually be making things worse, which is sad.
I guess I hope sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. Like I would hope that these I feel like a lot of things have changed in the last year in terms of Zoom, I guess Zoom specifically, that allow communication that we didn't really have before. But I also do think that in general, the gap has widened. Like certainly in schools and education, the gap between the haves and the have-nots has widened. And that's what we'd expect from
Right.
this past year.
If you had the resources to like attempt to pivot, you're going to be able to do it much more successfully than schools who really didn't have the resources and weren't going to suddenly go and find them. Chicago, the Chicago CPS, Chicago Public Schools, has had just like a battle this year over just getting back to an in-person learning model. And the Chicago Teachers Union has been, they had it was a very public battle. I don't know if you caught any wind of it in the Bay Area, but
I heard about that one. Yeah.
And there's just so many layers to people's experience. And there's a lot of parents who are like, remote learning is working really well for my kid. I don't need them to be back in school. So you guys just need to keep doing this. So, talk about differentiating. How do you keep doing that for like various segments of your student populations?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing people don't often talk about is that school is measuring how much you buy in to the system a lot of times. And if a kid grows up and can tell the system doesn't want them to be successful, then they're not going to buy into it as easily. And so the whole distance learning is rewarding the kids who are bought in more than the kids who need to be.
Yeah, I'm curious to see though how folks like you, or I mean anybody who's really in it for the long haul, is going to implement this in a way that is intended to like optimize it, because it's hard to think like you guys are just going to divest from it completely. You've already invested a bunch of resources into it.
And I think some things it does definitely improve, like for math specifically, it's very difficult for kids who feel like they're not good at math to ask questions in a classroom. Like there's a lot of peer pressure. And I actually think that's probably the same way you and I might have felt in those courageous conversations about race or something, is somehow what my math students feel like. But with math, what I can do is embed a video and put it like in a Desmos activity. And what I notice is that the kids will ask questions, and it's all the kids that will ask questions about what they don't understand. So in some sense, I think there is a way to take what we've learned from this year and improve it, because I think it's not like schools were working before all this happened. But if we just keep trying to make school about learning a bunch of content, like which is how it's evolved, I think, because that's what's easy to measure, then I think we're still going to see the disparity. But if we can try to make it about yeah, I mean, I guess if we can try to I think we need to see schools as the outcome of schools is we want kids to be creative and curious and engaged with the world rather than performing on a test.
And that was the whole reason I wanted to prioritize labs in particular, because a lab in all of its phases is intended to challenge thinking, decision making, and problem solving, and like stretch. Like you're not going to get this if you're just trying to go with what you're seeing right in front of you. You have to start to make conclusions. And to me, that learning how to think about thinking was so important. And it's abstract for a 14-year-old. That's the thing we also didn't touch on here, by the way, is 14-year-olds are like the worst student population to throw at a new teacher.
Yeah, because yeah. Oh man, what were they? Sophomores, freshmen, sophomores?
No, freshman bio, like unless I guess there was like an earth sciences or something that some freshmen would take maybe, but it's like I was just in middle school, now I'm in high school, so I'm an adult now, but I still am absolutely a middle schooler as far as just how I interact with the world. And it was just like, anytime I had a 17 or 18-year-old who was on their like second lap with bio was the best student, hands down. They're like, let me know what I need to do. I'm here to graduate. And I'm like, all right.
I hadn't mentioned this, but I was thinking this when I was thinking of this interview. It was my fifth year, the year after Yes closed, I went to a middle school. And that was in many ways harder than my first year. In terms of my look, the classroom management, I think I had just as much misbehavior. I felt just as ineffective on a day-to-day basis. What was easier was that I had I had learned that a lot of the discomfort I was going through was just me becoming comfortable with being ineffective. So I had the experience. It wasn't my first rodeo, I guess, but I had also kind of like had a reputation. I knew I had believed I was good at this, and then having to deal with that, it was hard. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of me making sense of that was like, there are not supposed to be this many 13-year-old little hormone monsters in a room together to learn about factoring polynomials or whatever I was teaching them,
Yeah, forget about it.
Yeah.
Have you seen, speaking of hormone monsters, have you seen the animated cartoon Big Mouth?
No. Is it
I
good?
highly recommend. Yeah, it's all about teenagers going through puberty, and hormone monsters are literally a part of the show, and it's hilarious, and it's very gross in the best possible way.
Big Mouth.
Big Mouth. It's on Netflix.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
Highly recommend.
I appreciate that. Do you have any final pearls of knowledge or nuggets of thought or words of wisdom or internal reflections? Anything else to share?
Pearls of knowledge, words of wisdom. Really none of the above for me, but I think the whole unrooting systemic racism comment, and that $250 million is like a laughable small amount of money to put towards that problem or concern. I think what occurs to me is like the challenges I still have in help in bringing others around to the idea that it's a problem that we should attempt to solve, and still after all these years not quite having the words to open a dialogue with folks that don't want to hear it. And these are, for me personally, some folks are actually very, very close in my life. Just at this point, I'm just like, I give up. Like, I don't know how to talk about this in a way that you're going to be willing to listen, or that like, what am I like? I would love to hear more of those pearls, because to me, it's like, you can throw money at it, but if you don't have more people believing it's a problem worth solving, then it doesn't really actually matter, because it's got to be down to the individual level around the decisions that people make every day.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I said that before we started recording, that part of the motivation for this is that Super Bowl commercial I saw where it said we're throwing $250 million to end systemic racism. And yeah, sometimes I think people want to believe it doesn't exist, or want to do the least amount to not concern themselves with it. That is that is the $1 million question, is how do you get people that benefit from our system to recognize there are a lot of people suffering from it.
Big time. I'd love to have another conversation of any kind that does not have 12 years of space in between it. So
all right,
it's good to connect. I appreciated the invite.
Okay, well, cool. Well, let's do it. Let's stay in touch. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for your time tonight.